Are you ready for the word? Yes. Turn to Romans 13. Government officials on the local, state, and federal levels have decided that they should take over more and more of our lives and control how Americans actually are allowed to move about and how Americans are actually allowed to live their lives. They have sent out stay-at-home orders, which mean that you are to stay home because it's for your own safety. They cloak all of their orders under that guise. We're doing it for your own good. But when they say stay home, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to stay home. No, they get to decide who gets to stay home and who doesn't have to, or who has to stay home and who doesn't have to. They get to decide which businesses are essential and which are non-essential, and where you can go and when you can go there. They have closed down non-essential businesses and meetings. They determined what was essential and what was not, and they made such decisions as to say, selling alcohol, that's essential, so you can stay open. Abortions are essential, so you can stay open. But religious gatherings, non-essential. You cannot meet together. Home Depot, that's essential, but gyms, hair salons, and 1,000 other businesses have been deemed non-essential, like giving hitting lessons to youth, non-essential. They tell you now that you can return in stages to what used to be. But you have to stay 6 feet away from everybody else. They call it social distancing. Many businesses are demanding that if you come into them, you must wear a mask. Restaurants, salons, and other places of businesses are told they can now open and operate, but only at 50% capacity. Do you understand what kind of burden and restraints that puts on them? 50% capacity. So my question to you this morning is concerning this coronavirus pandemic. My question is, do we have a biblical duty to submit to and obey the government? Well, let's go see. Romans 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of Yahweh. The powers that be are ordained of Yahweh. Whosoever therefore resists the power, resists the ordinance of Yahweh. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Will you then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and you shall have praise of the same. For he is the minister of Yahweh to you for good. But if you do that which is evil, be afraid. For he bears not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of Yahweh, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that does evil. Wherefore you must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also. For they are Yahweh's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Let's take those 7 verses and just real quickly break them down verse by verse, just real quickly. Verse 1 says that this command, this instruction applies to every soul. It says that every soul is to be subject to the higher powers. To be subject means to obey, to become subordinate, to submit yourself to. These higher powers, we're told, are of Yahweh. And these powers that be are ordained of Yahweh. This word ordained means they have been assigned their place by Yahweh, arranged and set in order by Yahweh. Verse 2 says, to resist these higher powers is to resist the ordinance of Yahweh. That's a powerful statement right there. When you resist them, you're resisting what Yahweh's put in place. When you resist them, you resist Yahweh and you receive damnation. Not just convicted of a crime, it says you will be condemned. You'll receive damnation. That's a serious statement. Verse 3, these rulers only want to ensure what is good and to prevent what's evil. If you'll submit to them and do what is good, then you will have their praise. Verse 4, break it down. These rulers are ministers of Yahweh. They are put there by Yahweh for your own good. If you do that which is evil, you need to be fearful of what's going to happen to you. They will come after you and they will get you. That's what verse 4 says. The ruler is the minister of Yahweh. He will severely punish you and cause you to suffer his wrath. Verse 5. Because verses 1 through 4 are true, you need to be submissive to do what they say and obey their instructions. And the two reasons given are because you do not want to incur their wrath, and number 2, because it's the right thing to do. Your own conscience tells you that you should. Verse 6, pay whatever tax they demand of you. Remember, they're servants of Yahweh. They're working continuously for you, so pay the darn tax. Do it gladly. Verse 7, pay all of them. County taxes, city taxes, state taxes, federal taxes, just pay them all. That's breaking down Romans 13, 1 through 7 as it is understood. Let me finish with verse 7. Verse 7 is telling you never to disagree with them or contradict them. Always show them honor. They're going to seek to strike fear in your hearts. That's okay. You should fear them according to what verse 7 says. Well, my question was, do we have a biblical duty to submit to and obey the government? Well, what does Romans 13 say? It says, if they say we cannot work with our hands to provide for our families, submit and obey. If they say we cannot open up our businesses, submit and obey. If they say we cannot gather for worship, submit and obey. If they say you have to wear a mask, submit and obey. If they say you have to have a vaccine, roll up your sleeve, take the vaccine, thank them for being servants of Yahweh or keeping you safe and healthy. The Bible says so right there in Romans 13. This morning I want to give you biblical evidence that Romans 13, biblical evidence, that Romans 13 is not commanding you to obey government officials. That's the way it's traditionally interpreted. That's the way it's taught. But I can show you from the Bible, that's not what it says. I'm going to share with you several truths that prove Romans 13 is not referring to government officials and or political figures. We have to start with an understanding of the word used there in verse 1, higher powers. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. The word translated higher there is arche, from which we get our word arch. He's my arch enemy, highest enemy. This word powers is used 3 times in verse 1, once in verse 2, and once in verse 3, a total of 5 times there. That Greek word translated powers is the word exousia. Exousia refers to authority, but it's a delegated authority or a delegated influence. Mark that and pay attention to that. The Greek word exousia refers to a delegated influence that's given to somebody. It's delegated to them. Now listen carefully to verse 1. Romans 13 is instruction concerning men who have been given this privilege of authority by who? By Yahweh. Verse 1 makes it plain. He's talking about people who have a delegated influence, high powers, but that high power has been given to them by Yahweh. It's concerning men who have been set in places of authority by Yahweh, not to all men who have places of authority. So the question becomes, is everyone who holds a place of authority set there by Yahweh? And the answer immediately is, there's no way. If you'll do a study of this word, exousia, you will see that the Bible refers to 3 separate groups of those who hold these places of higher powers. Number 1, the hordes of demons who exist do not do as they wish. Demons have higher powers. Rulers. Gentiles have rulers. The Bible talks about it. Gentiles who know nothing about Torah nor care to know anything about Torah still do not let people just live however they want to live. Gentiles make up rules and put laws on the book. We're not going to follow Yahweh's laws, but we're not going to let you live lawlessly. We'll give you laws that you have to abide by. And so Gentiles set up higher powers to make sure the people become subject to them and these laws and live according to them. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And then there is Israel or the Jews, and they also have rulers. They are known as, they begin at the top with the chief priest or the high priest. Under him are scribes, elders, rulers of synagogues, and then there are rulers of certain groups under that. Like the Pharisees is a sect all to themselves, but they'll have their own rulers. The Sadducees were a sect unto themselves, but they would vote and delegate authority to certain men to be their rulers. So when I searched the scriptures, I found these 3 groups prominently mentioned: demons, Gentiles, Israel, or the Jews. All were said to have higher powers or rulers. Let me show you just a few of the references. We could spend the next 3 weeks looking at all the references, but let's just look at a few of them. Matthew 9. Now, while you turn to Matthew 9, let me remind you to keep in mind what Romans 13:1 said. It's talking about higher, which is the word archon or archos, which means the ark, the highest, the chief. Rulers is a delegated authority. With that in mind, go to Matthew 9, verse 32. And as they went out, behold, they brought to Yeshua a dumb man possessed with a devil. And when the devil was cast out, the dumb spake, and the multitudes marveled, saying, it was never so seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, he cast out devils through the prince. Mark that word. Through the prince of the devils. That's the Greek word archon used in Romans 13:1. He cast out devils through the chief of the devils. The highest ruler of the devils is how he is able to do what he does. So the Pharisees are saying, yes, he has power. Yes, he can do amazing things, but he has gotten his authority and his power from the head ruler of the demons. The head ruler of the demons has delegated him power and authority to do what he does. Do we know who the head ruler of the demons is? Well, the Pharisees said they did. Go to Matthew 12. Matthew 12, verse 22. And then was brought unto him one possessed with the devil, blind and dumb, and he healed him, insomuch that the blind and the dumb both spake and saw. And all the people were amazed and said, is not this the son of David? But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, this fellow does not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of the devils. Again, the word prince there is the same word used in Romans 13:1. So they're now not just saying it's the prince of the devils, they're naming who this prince is. He is Beelzebub, Hebrew, transliteration from the Hebrew. Baal, a reference to Baal, we more commonly say. Zebub means the fly or the fly that stings. He does what he does by the Lord of the stinging flies. And this Lord of the stinging flies is over all of the demons of hell. This Lord of the stinging flies, we call Beelzebub, has delegated authority to Yeshua to be able to do what he does. Point being, demons have a higher ruler, and under him is an organized army with other rulers over them, over certain segments of them. Ephesians 6:12. Why don't you turn there real quick? I know you know it, but let's look at it just to build a base as we launch on from this. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. There's that word, arche or archon, higher powers. And against powers. That's the word exousia. So we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but we're wrestling against these principalities, these powers, these rulers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. World leaders who rule over darkness is what that's referring to. World leaders who rule over darkness. Is this a reference to spirits or to men controlled by those spirits? The answer is yes. Against spiritual wickedness in high places, that is, spiritual entities in the heavenlies, whose intent is to do wickedness, which means harm, damage, and destruction. So you have these spiritual entities working in the heavenlies whose intent is to do harm, damage, and bring destruction. But if you back up from them, you see there's a hierarchy. They have ranks. And they work within those ranks to carry out their goal, which is to harm and to destroy and to damage. So demons have rulers, and over those rulers they have a high or a higher ruler. Gentiles also have rulers. We don't even have to look at the Bible to know this to be true. Men love to set up positions from which they can rule. Kings, monarchs, prime ministers, presidents, senators, congressmen, governors, mayors, councilmen. The list goes on and on and on with subgroups of rulers under each one of those rulers. Men aren't allowed to just live. There's got to be rules to live by, and there's got to be enforcers of those rules. So they set up governments to govern all of that. Let's go see Yeshua's opinion on the way Gentiles set up rulers and his opinion on how they carry out their duties as rulers. Go to Matthew 20, verse 25. But Yeshua called them unto him and said, You know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority over them. Princes, that word there is the exousia, the rulers of the Gentiles. And they exercise dominion. This is one word in Greek, and it's very important. Exercise dominion is one Greek word. Kata kurio. Kata kurio. Now that comes from two Greek words. Kata means to be against. Kurio or kurios, what does that mean? You've heard the word kurios. Not curious, but kurios. Means Lord. So when you combine these two words, exercise dominion is actually a decent translation. Yeshua referred to those who rule among the Gentiles as those who exercise dominion. Their goal is to dominate their subjects. That's the word he used. They dominate their subjects. They rule over them. Their dominion is really against. That's the reason the word kata is there. Their rule is really against the people they rule over. Their purpose is to exercise control. Not to protect, but to control the people. Their aim is to always be in control of their populace or of their subjects. Read the rest of the verse. It says, the first part of the verse tells us we have these rulers who are seeking to exercise dominion over their subjects. But keep in mind, the rest of the verse tells us there's someone pulling their strings and telling them what to do. Rest of the verse, and they that are great exercise authority over them. The them is those who are ruling, exercising dominion. But Yeshua said, that's the ones you deal with on a day-to-day basis. But back up from them, and there's somebody controlling them. Right. There's somebody higher up who's pulling the purse strings, or who's putting pressure in another way to make them do what they're doing. It's always about control and domination and bringing people into subjection. This is how politics and this is how government works in America. Well, no. We're founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Yeah, well, we may have been founded that way. But that's not where we are. The government set up in America is a Gentile government, exercising dominion, seeking to exercise more and more dominion year after year. Our Constitution may have sought a government that was to be of the people, by the people, for the people, but that is not the reality that we live in today. Instead, we have a government that is ruling against the people, seeking to dominate us to greater and greater degrees. And the people have, in the past, resisted that. In the past, men would bow their backs up and push the government back and say, no, we are the land of the free. But decade after decade, more and more control is gained because American people are beginning to submit little by little by little to more of their dominion. Men decided, okay, we will buy permission to hunt on our own land. We'll buy permission to build our own house with our own money on our own land. We'll pay a tax every year to those who allowed us to build our house with our own money on our own land. We'll buy permission so we can cut somebody's hair. We'll buy permission so we can sell our produce. They exercise dominion, and Americans are learning to say, okay, we'll do what you said. And now in 2020, the Gentile ruler said, close your businesses, close your church doors until we tell you otherwise. Go in, stay in your house. And Americans submitted without so much as a grunt in protest. But listen to what Yeshua said to his followers. Verse 26. But it shall not be so among you. Whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief, that word, Greek word is protos, means first. Whoever be first among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. If you pay attention to what he said just in verse 26, you understand Yeshua did not have a very high opinion of the Gentile system of ruling. The Gentile system of exercising dominion. A system that America has adopted, Yeshua condemned. In Luke, he makes it clear that you should avoid having to deal with them at all. Luke 12 verse 57. Yea, and why even of yourselves judge you not what is right? Yeshua is saying the same thing that Paul said to the Corinthians when he said, y'all going to court and letting heathens decide your cases. Well, here Yeshua is saying the same thing, verse 57. Why aren't y'all taking care of matters between yourself? Verse 58. When you go with your adversary to the magistrate, and that is the word exousia, as you are in the way, give diligence that you may be delivered from him, lest he hale you to the judge, and the judge deliver you to the officer, and the officer cast you into prison. I tell you, you shall not depart thence till you have paid the very last mite. So here's what Yeshua said. Don't put yourself in a position where you've got to trust the government to take care of you. Learn to handle matters between yourself. Do not go to their rulers looking for justice, because if you do, he said, it's going to cost you dearly. Lawyers will bleed you dry of every penny you have. Their judges will convict you because they don't like you to start with, and their officers will throw your butt in prison. That's what Yeshua said. His opinion of Gentile rulers is clear. It's one of disdain and contempt. So we have rulers over the demons, we have rulers over the Gentiles, but you also will see that Israel or the Jews also had leaders. Look in Luke chapter 8. Several real quick references here. There are dozens, but I want to just show you several quick ones. Luke 8:41. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler, Archon, a ruler of the synagogue. He had delegated authority given to him over a particular synagogue. He was not the ruler of all synagogues, but that particular synagogue, he was the ruler over it. Luke 14:1. He came to pass, as Yeshua went into the house of one of the chief, Archon, ruler Pharisees, to eat bread on the Sabbath day, that they watched him. So the Pharisees had rulers, not just one, many. It says this man was one of the chief rulers. One. They had several who filled those positions. Remember, Nicodemus was said to have been a ruler of the Pharisees. He came to Yeshua by night because he didn't want the Pharisees to know he was talking to Yeshua, but he was considered or called or referenced as a ruler of the Pharisees. Look in Luke 23:13. And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people. So notice who, this is at the trial and crucifixion of Yeshua. Notice who Pilate called. He called the chief priest, and then he called the rulers and the people. Besides the chief priests, there were rulers over the people of Israel who had been delegated authority. He called them, recognizing their authority. The people delegated them authority, and Pilate recognized their delegated authority and called them in to talk to them about this man Yeshua who stood before him. Luke 24:20. This is the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and Yeshua has just asked them why they're so sad, and they're explaining it to him, and they say this in verse 20, and how the chief priest and our rulers, see, the chief priest and the rulers were in front of Pilate. The chief priest and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and have crucified him. So the disciples on the road to Emmaus refer to the men who met with Pilate on the day of Yeshua's crucifixion as being our rulers. We had given them delegated authority. They went before Pilate and they said, crucify. Look in Acts 3. Peter will describe the exact same event. Peter says this in Acts 3:14. But you denied the Holy One and the just, and desired a murderer to be granted unto you. And you killed the Prince of Life, whom Yahweh has raised up from the dead, whereof we are witnesses. And his name, through faith in his name, hath made this man strong, whom you see and know. Yea, the faith which is in him hath given him the perfect soundness in the presence of you all. This perfect soundness in the presence of you all. And now, brethren, I wot that through ignorance, I know that through ignorance you did it, as did also your rulers. So among Israel there were rulers. So my question is, as we go back to Romans 13, here's my question. When Romans 13:1 tells us to be subject to these higher rulers, which group is it talking about? The rulers over the demons? Well, Yahweh forbid. What about the rulers over the Gentiles? That's impossible. It's just as absurd to think that's what Romans 13 meant as it is to think that it meant the demon rulers. He used the word higher rulers, and he expects us to know what he's talking about. Is it the higher rulers of the Jews? Well, not completely. He is referring to them to a degree, but not without some limitations. Their rule, as it relates to the instruction from Yahweh, is to be followed. Their governing, as it relates to Torah, is to be followed. Their ruling, as it relates to their traditions and their commandments, is to be resisted and rejected. But as they rule according to Torah, follow their lead. Listen to their instruction. We'll see this clearly in just a moment. But let me show you that within this last group of rulers, the rulers over Israel and the Jews, within this last group of rulers is a subgroup. They are connected to the roots of Israel. They're connected to Torah. But they are not delegated rulers set in place by the high priest. They're set in place by Yahweh himself, and many times set in place by the apostles of Yahweh. Look in Titus 1, verse 5. Speaking to Titus, Paul said, "For this cause I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city as I had appointed you." We've got to have some rule and rulers established. So, ordain elders. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. For a bishop must be blameless as the steward of Yahweh, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of all men. Wait a minute, what?
Good man.
Well, we're supposed to love all men. Who's he supposed to love?
Good man.
Good men. A lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, specifically they of the circumcision. These Gentiles who have come among us. Listen what he says about them. Whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake. They're not teaching Torah, they're teaching what draws a crowd, teaching what makes them the most money, and we've got to shut their mouths. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said the Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true. Paul said, I will agree with him. That's been my experience as well. Wherefore rebuke them sharply that they may be sound in the faith. Verse 14. not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. We're not talking about traditions. We're not talking about fables. We're not talking about the commandments of men. That's not who Romans 13 is telling us to submit to, or what it's telling us to submit to. Unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving nothing is pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled. They profess that they know Yahweh, but in works they deny Him, being abominable and disobedient unto every good work they're reprobate. So we know that among Israel, who has rulers, there's a subgroup, and they're called the ecclesia. The called out ones, the assembly of Yahweh. There is this ecclesia that exists within Israel, still tied to its roots, but existing within Israel. And in them, Yahweh has set up an organized system of leadership as well, which Paul passed on to Titus to make sure he set up there in Crete. There's apostles, prophets, pastors, evangelists, teachers, also elders or bishops. These are gifts that Yahweh's given unto men when He led captivity, or when Yeshua gave to men when He led captivity captive. Now let me show you quickly, and I know we've been up here a while. That clock moves faster than I talk. Let me quickly show you that it's these rulers that are being spoken of in Romans 13. Take a deep breath, because we're just now getting to where we need to talk. We had to lay that foundation, but what we're about to say is very important. So let's plug in and listen. Verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of Yahweh. The powers that be are ordained of Yahweh. What powers are ordained of Yahweh? All powers? Well, that's impossible. It would be absurd. Demon powers are not ordained of Yahweh. And neither are Gentile powers ordained of Yahweh. Yahweh did not ordain or set Hitler in place. Neither has He set in place in America these leaders whose aim is to murder children in the womb, to confiscate all private property, to confiscate your means of defending yourself against their tyranny, to vaccinate you against your will, to control every move, passion, and thought you have. They are not ordained of Yahweh when they take those positions of authority. Romans 13 is referring to powers that Yahweh ordained. Gentile powers are not powers that Yahweh ordained. He did not ordain power to those who have lied, cheated, deceived, and pushed their ways into positions where they seek to exercise dominion over subjects. Verse 2. Whosoever therefore resist the power, resist the ordinance of Yahweh, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. This is the proof that we're talking about those who Yahweh has ordained. That Romans 13 is talking about Yahweh ordained powers. Does Pelosi, Soros, Gates, Fauci, Burke, Schumer, any of those, do they have the power or the authority to damn you? Absolutely not. Do you think that Yahweh would back them up to damn you? Absolutely not. They seek the power to control you, but they cannot damn you. Romans 13 is not speaking of Gentile rulers who exercise dominion. It's speaking of those who rule according to Yahweh's instruction and who have been placed there by them. To resist that is to resist Yahweh. Let me just try to make it simple with this illustration. It's just a small illustration among many. But if a pastor tells you that you should keep the Sabbath, if a pastor tells you you should keep the feast, if a pastor tells you you should know and use the proper names of Yahweh and Yeshua, If a pastor tells you that you should abstain from meats that are forbidden in Leviticus 11, if a pastor tells you you should forsake pagan holidays, to resist that is not to resist the pastor. He's not making that up. To resist that instruction is to resist Yahweh. That's what verse 2 is talking about. And when you resist somebody that Yahweh's ordained, placed in a position, and He's speaking on behalf of Yahweh, to resist that is to resist Yahweh and to bring upon yourself damnation. Does that make sense? Verse 3. I don't have to be so excited about it. Verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Will you then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and they shall have praise, and you shall have praise of the same. More proof that this is not talking about Gentile governments and their rulers. Gentile rulers are. Everybody say with me, are. They are a terror to good works.
Yes.
They are not a terror to evil works. They promote them. They fund them.
Right.
Do that which is good, and you shall have praise of them. That can't be talking about Gentile government officials. Gentile government officials are not going to praise you for keeping Torah.
No.
Oh, you keep the Sabbath. Yay. They're not going to do that. You abstain from pork and shrimp. Gentile government officials are not going to praise you and bless you for doing that. So this cannot be a reference to Gentile government officials. It is clear when you pay attention to what is written, it is clear that Romans 13 is referring to leadership, rulers, men who have been given a delegated influence within the kingdom of Yahweh, who rule by divine appointment from Him, supporting and teaching the instruction from Him found in Torah. Verse 4. He is the minister of Yahweh to thee for good. But if you do that which is evil, be afraid, for he bears not the sword in vain. The ruler being talked about here again, listen to what it says. He is a minister of Yahweh. It's the Greek word for servant. Does anybody know what the Greek word for servant is?
Doulos.
Say again?
Doulos.
Yeah, we pronounce it a little bit different, but we would go in the same direction. What is the Baptist term we get from that Greek word? Deacon. Diakonos. Diakonos. You know what a diakonos is, a deacon is? I'm not asking if you know what a Baptist deacon is. Do you know what this Greek word diakonos refers to? An attendant who runs errands. An attendant who runs errands. So, Romans 13:4 is referring to a servant who runs errands for Yahweh. Every prophet of Yahweh, you could sum up their calling in those words. They were just servants who ran errands for Yahweh. Mm-hmm. Yahweh would say, I need a message delivered to this one, and they'd go deliver it. I need a message delivered to this one, and they would go do it. And sometimes it cost them dearly. Yeah. But they were just attendants running errands for Yahweh. Romans 13 is talking about that kind of a person. Not some Gentile who seeks to exercise dominion over us. Is Bill Gates a diakonos?
Not a good one.
Is Dr. Fossey a diakonos of Yahweh? No. Dr. Birch?
No.
Pelosi? Schumer? No. When this Yahweh ordained leadership, according to Romans 13, it spans, because what people do, they look at this and say, Well, you're talking about servants of Yahweh here, but if you look at the rest of that verse, it talks about them using a sword. Well, that's got to be talking about government officials. No, it doesn't. When Yahweh or during leadership expands outside of the local assembly, there were leaders who were supposed to lead the entire nation according to Torah. Leaders inside the assembly had certain responsibilities. But outside that assembly were other rulers whose job it was to rule the entire nation according to Torah. They were authorized by Yahweh to use the sword or to use a death penalty in certain cases. He's the minister, the servant, the attendant of Yahweh. And the death penalty is allowed in certain places. Verse 5. Wherefore and I'm bringing it to a close. Wherefore we must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, Yahweh's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Get this. These verses have absolutely nothing to do with paying your taxes. Nothing. We have Yeshua's instruction there that we can fall back on. Render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. Render unto Yahweh that which is Yahweh. So we could go there, but that's not where we're at this morning. We're right here. Romans 13 is not commanding us to become so compliant that whatever the tax the Gentile government decides to put on you in their quest to exercise dominion over you, just quietly submit to it and pay whatever they say. That is not what this verse says. Listen to verse 6. For this cause pay ye tribute also. The Greek word for pay is not even in that verse. The Greek word for give is not in that verse. The word translated pay there is the Greek word teleos. Teleos means a point aimed at. We've talked about it before. It's where we get our word telescope. A telescope helps us find what we're aiming at in a distance, to see afar off what we're aiming at. It means to find the completion part, the finish part, to complete a thing or to finish a thing. Now keep that in mind, then look at the word translated tribute. If you look this word up, Strong's will tell you that its basic meaning is to bear a load or to bear your duty. It is a word that means bear a load or your duty. So, put those two things together. It's easy to just flip it and say, well, okay, it says pay your taxes here. That's not what it says. Put the two words together. Here's what verse 6 is telling you. Complete your duty. Carry your load. Be a good citizen in the kingdom of heaven. Don't be a burden to others. Pick your load up and carry it. Read the last part of verse 6. They are Yahweh's ministers attending continually unto this very thing. The very goal of the servants of Yahweh is to get you to understand what your duty is as a follower of Yeshua and as a child of Yahweh, and to get you to complete that duty. That's what that verse is saying. That's their goal, is to get you to understand your duty, get you to pick it up, and to carry that load through your life. I close with verse 7. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. This word translated render here does mean to give. So it says, give all whatever they are due. Tribute to whom tribute is due. Think of it this way. There are people all around you every day that you have an obligation to. You have a duty to. Pick your load up and carry it. As a father, you have a duty. With instruction from Torah how to carry out that duty. Carry that load. As a mother, you have a duty. As a husband, as a wife, as a child, as an employer, as an employee. You can't live your life without looking around and seeing others that you have an obligation to in some way. Whatever that obligation is, pick that load up and carry it. Don't be one who sits down and thinks everybody else ought to come take care of you. Where you have a responsibility, fulfill that responsibility. Render fear to whom fear is due. Well, who would that be? Well, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. Should you fear the government? Heck no. They should fear us. We should not fear them. Render honor to whom honor is due. Are Pelosi, Gates, Fossey, Soros, Schumer, and all those involved in the Obama Gate due honor? No. To them should be rendered criminal charges. Is honor due to those who promote abortion? Absolutely not. Is honor due to those who seek to take away our rights and our defenses? Absolutely not. So Romans 13 isn't saying just because somebody has a government position that you have to submit to them and subject to them. Romans 13 is talking about servants of Yahweh, giving you the instruction of Yahweh. That's who you are to submit to. Herod had his brother killed. And he took Herodias, who was his brother's wife, to be his wife. John the Baptizer did not give him honor. No honor was due him. John the Baptizer said to him, it's not right for you to have your brother's wife. And the way that Greek is written there, it means that he spoke in a discourse to Herod. That is, he confronted Herod with proof from Torah and said, here's what Torah says. And you're in violation of what Torah says. And it's not right for you. Torah says it's wrong. It's not right for you to have your brother's wife. John was an attendant for Yahweh, running an errand for Yahweh. Yeah, but it cost him his life. That's the reason Romans 13 verses 6 and 7 tells us this. Carry your load. Complete your duty. This isn't about us just being safe.
Right.
Romans 13 is not saying go hide somewhere and stay safe. Romans 13 says find out what your duty and your responsibility is and stand up like a man and take care of it.
Right.
This is about being servants of Yahweh, attending to His command. Herod had John killed and then became certain when he heard of Yeshua that Yeshua was actually John the Baptizer come back from the dead. He's a tormented soul. In Luke 13, turn there. Herod hears that Yeshua is in his territory. He doesn't like that because he thinks Yeshua is John the Baptist come back from the dead. And so he sent word by his underlings for Yeshua to get out of his territory. Get out. Go home. Let's read it. Luke 13:31, the same day there came certain of the Pharisees, saying unto him, Get thee out and depart thence, for Herod will kill you. By Yeshua's response, we know the message did not come from the Pharisees. They're just carrying the message. We know from Yeshua's response that the message came straight from Herod. What I want you to see as we move forward in this is that Yeshua did not say, well, guys, I know that he's been placed by Yahweh in a position of authority. He is the king of this territory. So if he says I got to go home, tell him I will comply. And I'll head out right now. No. It's not what he said. Listen to what he said. Today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet perish out of Jerusalem. I'm not going to be in this particular spot. I want you to deliver this message to that fox. I'm not going to be in this particular spot. But I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. I'm going to do it today, and I'm going to be walking as I do it. And I'm going to do it tomorrow, and I'm going to do it the third day. And I am headed toward Jerusalem because I've got an assignment there. I'm not running from him. And if he wants me, he knows where he can find me. If he wants to do what he said he's going to do, he knows where to find me. I'll be here moving in that direction. But I'm going to keep doing what I was doing. I love it. I will not abide by his stay home order. Not going to do it. The purpose of the message this morning is to say to us that somehow we have to wake up and stop thinking we have to be so compliant. Amen. Compliant is not a biblical concept you can find anywhere. And just because the government said stay home, there is no biblical mandate that we have to obey what they said. Don't stay home. Don't take the vaccine. Don't wear the mask. Place I've been getting my hair cut for years called me Monday and said, hey, we're back open. I said, that's awesome. Getting bushy headed. And they said, we have an appointment this afternoon available. Impossible. I'm in Florence. Can't get there today. Well, the next available appointment's next Tuesday. I said, that'll work. Put me down. She said, okay, I'll see you at such and such a time. And oh yeah, by the way, bring a mask. You'll have to wear a mask while we cut your hair. I said, no ma'am. You call me when I don't have to wear a mask. She said, are you serious? I said, I'll put my hair in a ponytail before I put on a mask for you to cut my hair. She said, you're serious? I said, I'm serious. When I don't have to wear a mask, you call me back. Well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is to comply is to perpetuate the lie that's being told. To comply is to give my approval of the deception that's taking place. Costco says you can't shop without a mask. Fine. You're not going to miss my dollar, and I'm not going to miss you. I'll shop somewhere else. Yep. We have to stop being so dad-blame compliant. Now, if somebody has underlying health issues, I understand taking precautions. But what's going on in America right now has reached a place of absurdity that is beyond being able to comprehend how absurd it is. Computer models are for deception purposes only.
True.
They're not using real data for the decisions they're making. They're using computer models. The same computer models they use to tell us that the ice was going to melt, the oceans were going to rise, and we were all going to be destroyed. It's all for the purpose of deceiving and causing fear so people will give up control.
Right.
Exercising dominion. Falsey. I'll call him Falsey instead of Falsey. Falsey and Birch are misleading people. You'll hear Dr. Birch use terms like this. They died with the COVID. Or they died after testing positive for COVID. Those types of words are used for the very purpose of misleading and deceiving. There's a lot of difference between saying, well, they died from COVID, and saying they died with COVID. They died from something else.
Right.
And many times when they're saying they died with it, or after testing positive, they really weren't even tested. All of what's going on right now in our land has been predicated upon lies, and it's been pushed because of wicked agendas. And until we refuse to comply, they will continue to exercise dominion.
Yes.
And there's not a lot I can do. I admit that. And there's not a lot I can do. I can let my hair grow.
Yep.
I don't have to shop at Costco. And I can still stand up and tell the people who will listen to me that Romans 13 is not telling you to bow down to wicked government officials, and so I'll do that. I was very pleased about that salon owner in Dallas and the stand she took. I'm very heartbroken that she seems to have been the only one willing. And an entire nation willing to still go up against the government and saying, you can't shut me down. Others are now beginning to follow a little bit. But it took a woman to do a man thing. Men need to pick up their load and carry it.
Yes.
Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He bless you. Hallelujah. You're dismissed. Good to see you. Glad you were here.